So joining me now is my friend and colleague, Robert Krychek. Now, Robert has been doing really an incredible job of being in the courtroom and documenting exactly what is going on inside the courtroom of the Tamara Lich and Chris Barber trial. And, you know, independent media has really led the way on the convoy, but also on the coverage of the convoy. Robert, tell me what the courtroom is like before we get into, you know, the fine details of what's happening in the courtroom and what I think are probably the failings of the Crown's impossible case against Tamara and Chris. But what's the courtroom like? Who's in there every single day?
Well, we've got on one side, we've got media on one side. So you've got the usual suspects. They're the largest organizations in Canada. You've got CTV, Global, CBC. You've also got what we can call, let's say, dissident news media, alternative news media. So I'm there, of course, representing Rebel News. We've also got some people there from Post Millennial. We've also got some people there from the Epoch Times. I've seen some other people, maybe I'll use the term bloggers. I don't mean that in a diminutive way, but people that are not affiliated with a particular organization and just do their own work under their own names on Twitter. Maybe they've got websites and so forth. And then the majority of the courtroom is composed of observers. Almost all of them, maybe aside from one, is composed of supporters of both Tamara Lich and Chris Barber.
Now, I'm reliably informed by hand-wringing maniacs subsidized by Justin Trudeau and the mainstream media that Tamara Lich, of course, was public enemy number one and a plague upon the city of Ottawa. And Ottawa residents just had to be defended from her. Are there many Ottawa residents in the courtroom?
Again, I've only met one resident in there who I would call a detractor from Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, and more broadly, let's say the Freedom Convoy. She was not sympathetic. I've spoken to her several times. So she's, let's say, outnumbered by maybe 30 people who tend to sort of alternate. So on logistics alone, or
sure.
To your point, there's literally nobody there from Ottawa who's just there to, you know, observe justice against this person that, you know, put them under siege. According to, you know, Justin Trudeau or, you know, former Mayor Jim Watson, the usual suspects.
You know what a great way to put that. Yeah, I mean, according to the mainstream media, this was a siege of Ottawa. You would think that there would be some interest from the victims of the siege, but apparently there is none, because it doesn't seem that, I would think a lot of the opposition, from what I've seen, and I watched this pretty closely, was kind of astroturfed. It was the same people recycled in the media over and over and over again, complaining about the convoy. And I'm glad to see that evidenced in the courtroom. Speaking of evidence in the courtroom, how about that for a segue? What's it like in the courtroom? How do you think this court case is going? Because from what I can understand, and again, I'm a layman, but I also do a lot of court reporting. How do you think the prosecution's case is going? I feel like they were given an impossible case, like a sack of garbage of a case, and now they're forced to go forward with it because of the predicament that they have been put in politically.
Oh no, there's two laypersons here. I'm a layperson too, but I've also got a mind and also pay attention to this, so I'll share with you what I've observed. So far, in terms of where we've gone procedurally, in the trial, we're still going through the prosecution's evidence, which includes invitations to witnesses. So obviously that's the first order of business. Once we go through all of them, then the defense will have the opportunity, if it chooses to do so, to introduce its own counter evidence, introduce its own witnesses. And to answer your question about how it's not going well for the prosecution at all. This is not just one man's opinion, observing from the outside. I can corroborate this with observations I've made inside the courtroom. And one major theme that's been going on since day one is that every single intervention from the judge, and she is not just this observer, she's relatively involved, I would say. She's not a wilting flower. Every intervention, aside from maybe a handful, have been, in essence, a reprimand of the prosecution's conduct and or something supportive towards the defense's position. And a major sub-theme of that is she is challenging the relevance or legitimacy of evidence introduced by the prosecution, particularly in the form of testimony from its witnesses. I'll just give you one example, although this is going on many, many times. So far, all the witnesses have been aside from one, these sort of bureaucratic police officer types, right? And a lot of them have these logbooks or record books where they keep notes from their daily duties. And given that most of them are in these sort of supervisory roles where they're not actually on the ground dealing with events in the context of the Freedom Convoy, they're getting information intelligence, as they call it, that comes up the chain of command. So when they share, oh, my notebook says this or that happened, or apparently this happened on that date, it's always second or third or fourth hand. It's always coming from a far distance removed from them in their offices in Ottawa. And secondarily, it's not something that they observed or experienced firsthand. So again, the testimonies from these witnesses has often been critiqued by the judge. Now, remember, there's no jury here. So when the judge says that this witness that I'm about to hear, based on what I just mentioned to you, the fact that this is second, third, fourth hand information, it's hearsay, she says it has very little to no weight, but she'll allow it to proceed. But again, this is an ongoing theme, the challenge of relevance to the actual charges at hand. I'll go into more detail about that later.
Sure. I've heard criticisms of the prosecution's case in that it seems as though they want to put the convoy on trial, as opposed to Tamara and Chris for the things they're charged. It seems that they want a political trial in the public sphere, as opposed to focusing on the evidence directed at Tamara and Chris and the evidence on which the charges are based.
Yeah, this is amazing. Okay, so in the opening statement from the prosecution on day one, they literally said, this is not an exact quote, but the guy said this, his name is Tim Radcliffe. This is not a prosecution of the convoy.
Right.
But here we are 3 weeks in, and basically all of the testimony, all of the evidence has been about what happened during the convoy. So there's this massive disconnect between one of the claims in the opening statement and how events have unfolded thus far. Moreover, let's just imagine how this might play out if it was something that made sense. You would imagine that you'd have video and or witnesses saying, I saw this person at this location on this date at this time doing this thing.
Right.
And you would think that the prosecution would then explain to the judge to make it clear, that's what this witness is claiming, and now let me link it to the charge. We haven't seen any of that. It's just these cops saying, again, these sort of bureaucratic cops saying what they've heard from their subordinates in terms of what may have happened. I'll give you one other example that was, I'll never forget, jumped out at me. There was this montage, 11.5-minute video that was played basically on the first day of proceedings. And it was composed of video that was collected primarily from body cam footage from police officers who were deployed to the Freedom Convoy for what they call crowd control. And in this 11.5-minute video, there was not a second of any violence from demonstrators towards police officers or anyone. Now, the judge actually intervened, I think it was day 3, day 4, somewhere in the first week, and she actually made a point that she watched that video, and the only violence she saw was one instance where a police officer struck a demonstrator. And that goes to the heart of your question earlier about how this is sort of a prosecution of the demonstration itself rather than the specific individuals being charged.
Oh, hey, what you just saw there is a clip from my weekly full-length show, The Gun Show. It airs on Wednesday, but this is the internet. You can watch it whenever you feel like. You just have to become a subscriber to our paywalled premium content. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com to become a member today.